Welcome back to Detections Podcast with your hosts, XL Detrades and
Understudy 77.
Sweet, we're back. Christmas time is over. Got tons of stuff going on. But since the Christmas holiday is over, how did yours go?
My kid got a lot. Like a lot. But I also got cool stuff. Like me and my wife had basically a contest to try to outdo each other this year. She won, by the way, by getting me a headphone amplifier that I've wanted for many, many years.
The one you showed me before we started, the shit Valhalla?
The shit Valhalla 2.
Nice.
It sounds amazing, I must say. I'm a bit of like a nut when it comes to listening to music and stuff. So it's just fucking brilliant. And I love it. But more than that, my kid had an awesome, awesome time. And that's really what Christmas is all about in our house at this point because, you know, we have the little rascal.
Yes.
How about you?
It was good. I actually did a mountain retreat with my dad and my sister and her family. Did it for a full week. Got away from pretty much everything, just up high enough to have snow. Went and did a hike, and you saw some of the pictures to a high elevation lake that was completely frozen over, which was fantastic. And I actually showed my sister all of the links from our last episode with the geeky Christmas gifts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, apparently my nephew is really into robotics, and my other nephew, Alex, is also into pretty much a nerd. So I was looking at getting them some of the coding and robotics stuff now that they're getting older to help them start learning that.
Well, that's just fantastic. I'm glad I could help somebody who's like close to the family, so to speak.
Yes, and my sister loved it. Like I showed her the stuff, let her watch some of the videos, and she's like, "That's an excellent idea." So
right
next year,
we talked about the Cubeto thing. We actually did get one.
Nice.
So we played with it a little bit. We haven't really dug deep into it because it's like 2 days after Christmas, and you know, Christmas Day, there's a lot of shit going on.
Yeah.
So we haven't really dug into it yet, but man, it's so cool. And it's way smoother than I thought. Like when you press that button, like that little robot moves so smooth. I'm very excited.
I'm looking forward to getting myself one of those battle bots too.
Right? I want one. They were so cool. But with New Year's right around the corner, right? Like let's take a minute for housekeeping items. So starting next year, which is basically starting the week after you listen to this episode, we'll be on a weekly format instead of a bi-weekly.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
It is. How we're going to find the time, we'll figure that out. But the biggest complaint that we got is there needs to be more. So we have enough to talk about. We decided, hey, we'll switch to weekly. Like we can probably spend 45 minutes to an hour chatting every week. We'll make that work.
Yes, and it'll just still come out on every Sunday.
Yep, around 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, ready for that Monday morning commute.
Correct. We'll also be kicking off the new year with a guest that I'm not going to reveal quite yet.
Dude, it's pretty exciting. And the other exciting stuff for us too, you know, coming up at the end of the year is blown away by how many listens we've had after just 5 episodes?
Yeah, the support has been so humbling and amazing, right? Everybody. Like it really has. Like we are just shy of 1,000 total listens. Which, you know, for October on, it's amazing. It's amazing.
And like, even the Twitter account that we only kind of have a chance sometimes to go post stuff is already almost at that 400 person mark in just 2.5 months.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. Like, thank you everybody so much. Like you guys, we would do this for 3 people. Don't get me wrong. 'Cause it's fun for us. But I'm glad it seems like everybody else is enjoying it too. Like, does that right?
Yeah,
I feel like that tracks.
I think so. I mean, and that's what we said at the beginning. Our point was right. Like, we just wanted to be helpful and for people to get something out of it
and have a little bit of fun.
Speaking of fun, I know we were talking about how much news has come up since we last recorded. And I think you have something to start it off with.
I do, and specifically because this ties in really well with last week. You know, last episode. So last episode we talked a lot about like, you know, link clicking and stuff and some of the pros and cons of something like VirusTotal, right?
Yeah.
So New Orleans had a cyber attack, and one of the things that we're going to do because of the sheer number of cyber attacks is try to gravitate away from your common run-of-the-mill cyber attack and talk about the things that are more interesting. But this New Orleans thing is interesting because they found out that it's likely Ryuk that was responsible for it because of files that were uploaded to VirusTotal. So a day after the ransomware attack, memory dumps of suspicious executables were uploaded from an IP address from the USA to VirusTotal. One of those memory dumps contained numerous references to New Orleans and Ryuk, and was later found by, a security researcher. So, in general, like we talked about this last week, be really fucking careful what you upload to VirusTotal, because sticking up your mem dumps that have Ryuk stuff plus, like, personal shit about the company that you work for, probably not the best idea. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that those people are going to just go fucking nuts about this, and somebody's probably going to lose their ass.
Yeah, I mean, and it just goes to show, like what we were talking about, there are people that constantly scrape those things to find interesting information.
Constantly. Like, that's just part of the game. Like, looking for interesting stuff there and then disseminating that information is part of the game, both on the offensive and defensive side, as well as, like, on the actual attacker side. So, be careful what you put up on VirusTotal. It's just personal advice. That's all I'm going to go into on that one. Well, and as always, we'll have all the links on the blog so that you can go read in full if you want. We're more of a glance coverage of what we found was interesting than we are. I'm not going to fucking read an article to you. That's a waste of everybody's time.
And that'd be boring as hell.
Yeah, it would. On today's episode, I'm going to read this Brian Krebs article word for word.
Bring me piano wire.
I could bring you a piano. That would spice things up a little bit. Maybe if we put the articles to music, that could be fun. Oh, I can't sing, though, so that's all on you.
Next year.
Yeah, you got to sing. I can't sing. I can play guitar, kind of. You got to sing.
You don't want me involved in that. I'll just get people who owe me things to do it for us.
There you go.
What else you got?
All right. So, let's do another quick one here. And this is just kind of a couple quick things that are really interesting. Some we'll expand on a lot later, in later episodes that I think will be really good episodes. So first off, Totalk, right? A messaging app, been downloaded to millions of phones. Really interesting, this one specifically, because it's another one of those secure video or text message apps. It's largely been shut down now from everywhere. It's a spying tool for the United Arab Emirates to track every conversation, movement, relationship, appointment, sound, and image to those who put it on their phone.
Jesus.
So, like, there's a relatively new app downloaded millions of times between Apple and Google throughout the Middle East, Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. And literally, it's just a spying tool, which is really fucking interesting. So, again, like, general piece of advice, try to check your sources on apps. Like, I'm a Signal fan personally, but it's always worth it, like, when a new secure messaging app comes up, to be careful, because this shit really happens in the real world. And that information is golden, right? Like, your information is golden. And that'll take us to one of the bigger cool things to talk about. And there's kind of two articles that tie into this, and we'll have both of them listed. The first one is specifically about what your car knows about you, and somebody hacked a Chevy to test. So on a recent drive, a Chevy collected precise location, stored your phone's ID, the people it called, judged the acceleration, the braking style, and sent all this stuff back over to General Motors. And it just gets to be more and more and more shit that your car is tracking, like your messages and anything if you link your phone. What gets even more frightening is this concept of your phone, right? So, really good New York Times article. They were given a data set of 12 million phones in one data set. And there's hundreds of companies that collect specific location data from you. Some of them you've never heard of, some of them you know. A lot of them they work with partners, right? The thing that was so interesting about this, like realistically, was that they were able to extrapolate this data and find, like, officials of note, like famous singers, famous athletes, people within government, find out where they live, what their habits were, where they went. So it's all anonymized data, quote unquote, right? But because you have all of it, you can actually extrapolate and isolate like one dot on the map and watch an entire person's map where they go, where their home is. You can then check public record. You can see where they work, and you can do all these things to find out exactly who that person is. It's fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
But I strongly suggest, and don't get me wrong, it's not going to make me stop using my cell phone, as horrifying as it is. Like, I enjoy the convenience, but at the same time, this article's shining a lot of light on shit, and it's a Times article, so, like, a lot more than just InfoSec people are going to read it, right?
Yes.
So I'm hoping that this shines a lot of light on this entire industry of precise location data, and something moves forward with it. Because they literally walk you through this, like, okay, like, here's one dot extrapolated, here's all the pings from that dot, and here's literally a map of everywhere that person went over X amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's freaking awesome, and I strongly recommend that anybody read that article.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of one of the books that I read that got me interested with Cory Doctorow, called Big Brother, where they deal with that in an RFID situation under San Francisco after a terrorist attack. It was pretty interesting at how he discussed that in that book, and then how the characters did some anti-surveillance behaviors to counteract that.
That's the thing, though. You don't even need to, like, be like, oh, it's not opt-in. It's literally everybody's opting into it. Like,
yep.
I just think back to the horrible prequel Star Wars movies. Like, this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause. Like, not that this is the exact same case, but, like, typically when something like this happens, where everybody's like, I'm buying into this, I'm in, this is awesome, and then, like, you find out all this seedy shit that's going on in the background. Like,
yeah,
that gets really, really fucking interesting.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna pass it off to you for a minute. Fill us in with some stuff.
Sweet. Well, I'll start with a couple of quick ones here that I found interesting, that definitely be worth reading up on if people haven't already. The first one is a Brian Krebs article from his Krebs on Security site, where he's talking about how ransomware gangs are now outing the victim businesses that don't pay up, meaning they're actually starting to publish data that gets encrypted.
That's fucking frightening too, right?
Right.
Because it's not just about the ransom anymore. It's if you don't pay the ransom, they're like, well, we're just going to tell everybody we hacked you then. And then you can deal with the fallout either way. And for now you're a ransom and fucking blackmail. Yep.
Definite criminal business escalation there, and PR issues that a lot of organizations would have to deal with.
Yeah,
the other quick touch. Sorry, go ahead.
Watch out for that shit, because, like, that's going to be a thing. Because once a first person escalates like that, it's going to happen more often.
Yeah, and any more ransomware I think would be good and smart to have as a business use case for all the policies and procedures to deal with. How do we respond? What is the recovery plan? And things like that. Because if that's happening now, that escalation's happening, it's only going to become more common.
Oh, God, yeah. So, and I want to roll backward a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to tie something in because I have a question. We were just talking about all this unauthorized tracking shit, right?
Yep.
Or I guess authorized tracking shit in this case. That brings us back to our favorite camera, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, that apparently likes to be in the news every week. Because I did find something else that was interesting about our favorite camera, Ring, and how they recently had a data leak that exposed the personal details of, looks like, over 3,600 Ring camera owners. Now, we've talked about it a lot, some of the implications with tie-ins with law enforcement and things like that. So, and I don't remember if it was the last episode or one of our side conversations about how a criminal broke into a Ring camera and was talking to a child in their room through the Ring camera.
Was it a Ring?
Yes.
I thought the Ring was just an outdoor. But no, we definitely talked about that.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so the information that got leaked in this personal information leak was the login emails, the passwords, the time zones, the names of the cameras, and so that with just a little bit of extra information, people would have been able to remotely log into all of these Ring cameras that these people had installed.
Correction, by the way, or not correction, you are right. I looked it up because I wanted to make sure that we fact check ourselves.
Yes.
So yes, it was a Ring camera. So again, just don't fucking buy a Ring camera. Like at this point, like it does not have the detection seal of approval, which by the way, we have stickers now. So like those can serve as a functional seal of approval on things. So that's a thing. But like, just don't buy a Ring camera. Like that. If you want to, you are the master of your own destiny. But we warned you.
Yeah, understand the risk. Like, we're sharing this to share the risk so that there's an informed decision made about what sort of potential attacks and what sort of information and access non-law enforcement people and law enforcement people would have access to.
Correct.
All right. So that, yeah. And kind of as a tie-in to that, too, is one of the other quick touches that I wanted to bring up was this interesting thing that I found on GitHub that the user is calling Canary Tail. It's a proposed standard for warrant canaries. And then this seppuku, what is it? The seppuku promise? I forget the term for it. But warrant canaries are legal documents. Oh, seppuku pledge. Here it is. Are these legal documents regarding warrant serving? And the seppuku pledge is basically a business. Let me back up here a little bit. So Canary Warrant is basically a company that would say they have a published article or policy that says we currently don't have any law enforcement requests for access to private information. And then if that doesn't exist on their website, one can assume that there actually is a request in to get access to the private information through a warrant. And then the seppuku pledge is a company would say, if we receive one of those requests, we're just going to shut down our company instead of complying. So this person has this proposed standardization for how those documents and policies are written and served up to the community and things like that.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So because normally, like, when these subpoenas are served, they're served with a gag order. That means the company can't tell people that this subpoena has been issued. And so by removing the document, that's a way that they can say, we have potentially been issued a subpoena, but we're not actually explicitly telling you, so we're not violating the court order.
Okay.
So, yeah, this was very interesting to me as I'm like starting to have conversations with people locally who are in the legal side, trying to bridge between InfoSec and the legal side, finding out about this stuff and seeing that there is some people out there trying to standardize this as a way to keep the public informed while also not violating the law.
Sure. So here's another interesting one, and this is a good for public information, right?
Yeah.
This happened a little while ago, but Facebook and Twitter shut down a whole network of fake accounts of about 55 million people that pushed pro-Trump messages while masquerading as Americans with AI-generated faces as profile photos. Like, we're at that stage. And I want to do a whole fucking episode on, like, media deception and, like, election interference through deception techniques and stuff, because I think it's really, really interesting. And we're going to have to, we'll line up a really, really good guest for that. Yet to be determined. But we will line up a really awesome guest for that. Because it's such an interesting thing in, like, working for a media organization myself. Like, it's a problem that we have, right? Like, how do you battle misinformation while still making sure that people have a voice? While understanding at the same time that a good majority of the people that have the voice, and you can do some research on this, it gets really interesting. China, Russia, a bunch of our, malicious actors at this point are essentially emulating American citizens playing both sides of the fire and stoking both sides of the fire in order to garner a response, continue split separation between the populace, and basically destabilize us as a whole, which is insane.
Right?
Like, it's an insane world that we're living in, but, like, that is the power of the internet. Like, it has that power. So, like, something to be aware of, like, when you read stuff, like, it could be a Russian trying to convince you of something so that you get pissed off at somebody else. Like, worth knowing about. And I'm not saying that everybody's a Russian, but I am saying it could be. And it's fucking scary, but good to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely very good to be aware of. I mean, as with the internet, making global communication happen the way that it does, yeah. I mean, trying to destabilize other governments has always been a takeover tactic for, I don't know, as long as I've been reading history, at least, like, throughout history.
Yeah, but this is such a new way to do it. Because our information now is, for a lot of people, literally coming from a Facebook post or a tweet, right? Like, we don't fact check. And I mean, I fall into it too. Like, we're going to do the angel tree thing next year because, you know, we want to teach my kid, my daughter, like this concept of like helping other people in service and like making somebody else's Christmas super special, not just your own. And I was just scrolling through shit and I saw an article in it, like, well, I'll get to that after I talk about the article. It was talking about, like, I was just at Walmart and, like, everybody was returning these donations and it's disgusting and blah, blah, blah. Not only, like, poor shaming, but at the same time, like, it invokes a specific emotion. You're like, well, maybe I shouldn't fucking do that thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that wouldn't be the right thing to do because immediately, like, snap your fingers, emotion evoked. But then you go fact check and, like, I have a tendency of, like, once I calm down, like, I think about it for a minute, I go, I should go fucking fact check this.
Yeah.
And I've gotten pretty good at fact-checking a lot of things. But for the most part, if something looks like it's built, especially like the chain letter thing of tomorrow, right? Because we're really in that, like, those are the new chain letters, right? Oh, if you poop, a snake will come out of your toilet. Like, we've just expanded way beyond that. But they all invoke emotion.
Yeah.
So, like, when you read something that's supposed to invoke your emotion, think about it. Maybe go fact check it. Maybe see if it was posted somewhere else. Maybe see what other people are saying about it. Maybe go to like other news sources. I'm not saying to always trust the news because the news has turned into a bit of a disgusting thing for the most part. And it's all Ron Burgundy's fault because I just watched Anchorman 2 the other night. See, fake news.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And that's all good, right? Because anytime you fact check or check more than one news source, you're providing more data points. And you help to remove any sort of lean or bias that one would inherently have just because we're human. Exactly.
And the lesson for this, kids and adults, is to, I hope no kids listen to this. We swear a lot. Anyway, the lesson is, if it invokes a strong reaction, go get other data points.
Yeah.
Like, don't let your gut emotional reaction control your analysis and decision. We are analysts by trade. I assume most of the people who listen to this are analysts by trade. It's all about data points. The emotional reaction does not help us. We need to move past that. That's important. We should do a whole fucking show on that.
Yeah. There's a lot. So, but you were talking about deception, which reminded me of one of the other news articles I was looking at. Have you heard or read anything about this new IDLE program the FBI is offering for private industry?
I have not.
So I don't want to go too much into it because it is a gigantic article. But it looks like the FBI, they're talking about it in generic terms, and the pamphlet the program that was passed out is pretty generic in comparison. But the Ars Technica article, there's a couple of phrases I think in here help explain at least the proposed goal behind it. It's like putting bogus pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, or ink packs inside of money for a data heist.
I mean, it's honeypot on steroids, right?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. It looks like it's a honeypot on steroids, but it's something that they're offering to private companies that the FBI itself would then have access to, right? So helping law enforcement, but giving FBI access to things that are attacking your network or attempting to attack your network or getting recon on it. I'm definitely looking forward to reading this a little bit more and digging in a little bit more about the actual program. But yeah, that reminded me because they're using that whole deception as a deception for detection as a service that they're offering.
Okay, and there's a whole like really interesting concept of that, like get them to focus over here, fingerprint it, and then you know, one, they're over here wasting their time, but two, you've got a pretty good fingerprint of what they're doing. But I do want to throw in a disclaimer. I have, in my career, seen a shop that is ready or capable of working on cyber deception for defense. Like, You got to get all your other shit straight for the most part before you move into that. Yeah. Like, that is a difficult topic, and not if you can't find them when they pivot, it's fucking useless. Like,
this will definitely be a really good conversation for an upcoming episode we have, because I've been trying to work a way that some of the pieces that could be used even in a messy current IT infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, like I employ a couple in certain ways. Not that I'm going to go into any of them, but they're all light enough and low impact enough that they don't affect the rest of the program that I'm trying to build, which is the key. Yep. Basically, don't get shiny fucking squirrel problem and be like, oh, look, deception program. Like, try to avoid that.
Yes.
Because it's fucking cool as hell and it's sexy as hell, but like, be ready for it and don't lose sight. I often say that defenders are like squirrels. Because we just have this tendency, right? Yep. Where we're like, oh my God, look, a squirrel. Like, this is the new hotness. This is the thing I read in the news today. We have to put everything we've been working on for the last 6 months on a break right now because this shit is so cool. Don't do that. Like, your building blocks, like your basics are still the most important fucking thing you can do. For many, and, you know, based on the name of this podcast, one of the things that I believe is your baseline is your fucking detections program.
Yeah, incident response starts with the detection.
Yeah. So,
like, I got one more, and then I'll pass it back to you before we get on to our topic.
Cool.
I'll just breeze on it really quick because we're talking about analysts.
I have comments about this one.
It's an interesting thing, something that we can definitely spend more time talking about, probably in another episode. But it's a Wired article. This specifically was about one of the guys at Darktrace.
Yeah, this is Darktrace.
Yeah, this is Darktrace, and how they built this AI model that was able to take out, I think there was like 92% of the low-level work from a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 analyst. But the conversation around mimicking an analyst's intuition through an AI to take out a lot of the busy work so they can focus on the interesting and complex things that a human brain is good
at. Bullshit. Huh? Sorry, continue.
No, that was it. Like, that was the whole premise of the article. And then I'm like, I want to share it because it is just provoking enough to start a very interesting conversation.
It's a really good topic to talk about, and maybe in 10 or 20 years we'll be closer. You can automate baseline tasks. You can automate data enrichment. You can automate for an anomaly detection, which is something we've been doing for a long time, the anomaly detection part. We can get way more advanced with it, right? We can look at bigger data sets. We can do a lot of cool stuff. I do not believe that we can, as the headline says, automate intuition.
Yeah.
Like, that is a uniquely human trait at this point. And I don't think we're there yet. But
CPUs are good at math. The human brain is good at dealing with complex and divergent styles of data gathering.
Yep. I used to tell a team that I had years back, I used to tell all the time, they'd be like, we have too much noise. I'm like, cool. So how do we get rid of the noise? They're like, well, we just need to get rid of some of the alerts. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But can you guarantee that nothing bad is going to come in there? It's not just about fidelity. And I have a whole theory, and we'll talk about this more in depthly later, but impactor intent, fidelity, and frequency. And we could spend a whole episode talking about that structure. But what I'm getting at with that is this concept that, like, for the most part, like, the really serious shit, it gets found in the low fidelity, bottom of the barrel shit that most analysts don't want to look at. Like, that's where all the good shit is. It takes some work, but that's where a lot of the good shit is. Like, that's just the nature of this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we'll talk about that one later.
Yes, and now the rest of your news.
Yeah, we'll shift gears for a little bit, because this one's really interesting. And I didn't actually know about this until ICANN got involved. But did you know, and this directly affects us actually, that they are trying to sell, they as in the Public Internet Registry, is trying to sell .org to a private equity firm owned by Mitt Romney and some other people. Well, the Romneys and some other people.
What the fuck? No.
Yeah, that's a thing.
I own the .org for detection. Like, don't get me more money.
Well, technically you don't own a domain, right? You lease it.
Yeah.
So, like, if they sell it, then this whole fucking Ethos Capital is the name. It could be like, your .orgs are now $1 billion a year. That won't happen, but it'll probably go up to several hundred. ICANN did block it. They paused the sale for now because they want to actually examine the deal. But honestly, it looks like it might actually go through. So I wonder if we'll see other domains being sold off to private equity firms, which is interesting and horrifying at the same time in a lot of ways.
I'm really curious as to, what's going on behind the scenes that's driving this. Like, is there just a lack of funds coming in for the, like,
it's a nonprofit, so it's possible. Like, it's very possible that there's not enough funds coming in for the Public Internet Registry and by way of ICANN. I would strongly encourage people to read up on this one. It's really interesting, and it's going to be really interesting for, like, the state of the internet.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Because .org has been a core top-level domain for a really long time.
Yep. And then we have one last one. And this one is actually going to tie into next week's episode. But I want to mention it now because this is really important. PowerShell Empire, that big thing that has been used by hundreds of security researchers and thousands of attackers.
Yeah.
Empire has been converted to Python 3 and is now supported again publicly, openly, by a security research team. They updated a bunch of shit. So they basically built it so that it has improved evasion. They built it so that it randomizes JAW3 hashes. So modifying JAW3 and JAW3S signature randomization.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of no more detection stuff in this. I'm not going to go long and deep into the very, very complicated topic that is open source security tooling like this and how often it's used for evil. We're going to save that conversation for next week with Mr. Andrew Thompson, who's been largely leading this charge on Twitter. Because it is an incredibly complicated topic, but it's also an incredibly important conversation to have. Like, re-releasing Empire and re-updating it with improved evasion technology, JAW3, random signature randomization, all that stuff. Does that have benefit to the safety and defense of companies and corporations? That's the important question. And how much of what we build in security actually does benefit security as a whole versus how much of it greatly benefits attackers? Because, Empire was partially responsible for, one of the biggest fucking, financial crisis ransomware attacks there was, I think. Or was that called Bolt Strike? I think it was Empire. I could be wrong. I've read a lot.
I don't remember either, but I do know Empire and Cobalt has been tied in with a great number of those.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway.
That'll be a good conversation. Even though it kind of has been had for a while, it'll be good to bring up again as things have changed in the technology realm since the conversation was first started.
I'm also hoping to humanize it a little bit by putting it in voice rather than in text because so much gets lost in text.
Text fucking sucks on complex topics like this.
It does. So it's not going to be like a big debate. It's going to be a conversation, but it's going to be fun next week. I'm actually really looking forward to that one. That's going to be a really cool way to kick off the year.
Oh, yeah.
So what's our topic? I forgot.
Our topic is an interesting one. So I was thinking about it when I brought this up to you. Most people do, looking back, year in review at the end. And kind of what popped into my head and thinking about it was this metrics or key performance indicator thing that SOCs and forensics and incident response teams have to deal with. As kind of an end of the year look back, but also still incredibly relevant. Because I know both you and I have experienced really shitty metrics that don't do anything and are easy to game.
Yeah.
Compared to ones that actually show the work that analysts do, which can be abstract a lot of the time.
Yes. So, two things that are mildly interesting. First one, I forgot the first one. I get my yearly look back from Facebook. No, that's not true. But, if I don't have data, I can't do a year in review, right?
Yep.
But secondly, I do apologize to all of you who fall asleep during this conversation.
We'll try to keep it interesting with like vocal changes and stuff. But yeah,
I can work on changing the pitch of my voice as I talk about this topic. Also, as boring as this stuff can be occasionally, like just understand and bear in mind I'm a manager, so I obviously don't know shit. This stuff is so fucking important.
Yeah.
Like, for every analyst who's like, fuck metrics suck. See, I'm changing the inflection of my voice. This stuff is so important because data determines business decisions. And security does not determine business decisions. Data determines business decisions.
And this gets into like a thing that I've been trying to help the analysts that I work with to make the transition on mentally, is from that security making decisions to it doesn't matter what you say if it doesn't make it up to the decision makers in business language.
The fact
and metrics is a way that you can get that into a language that they understand.
The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, your gut is worth absolutely squat to somebody who doesn't know you.
Yep.
That's just the way this works. I hate to say it, you could be the best fucking analyst and have the best points in the world, but your gut feeling, or you knowing this at your core but not quite being able to prove it, doesn't matter to anybody who doesn't know you or most of the people who are making the decisions. That's just business.
And these metrics help get things that analysts want, like training, like more bodies. Unless you can build that business case from the metrics, the senior management that determines what your group's budget is sees that you don't need any more money.
Yep. And there's a lot to be said about defenders and analysts starting to understand, or trying to understand, a little bit more of the business perspective that comes into play. It'll make them less frustrated. It'll make them better communicators, and it'll make them better overall at getting the things that they need to do their job appropriately. So
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree. There's a mentality thing that I want to discuss later, but you've been doing this more, so I'm going to let you start it off with throwing some stuff out there about metrics, valuable metrics versus the shitty ones that we've seen, things like that.
So you started off with an interesting point. You were talking about you can use metrics to get you bodies. That's an interesting point, because you can. So let's talk about how that works, like realistically. And there's no guarantee that you'll get bodies. There's a lot of things that go into that, as I've learned from playing the political, showing that exists to try to get bodies. But there's a lot of things that you can learn. So, a lot of SOCs, and shame on you, SOCs. It's not how you should work. Go, Bob handled more alerts than Jimmy. Bob is clearly the better analyst. That doesn't mean shit. There's complexity differences. There's investigation time differences. There's a lot of things that go into individual performance tracking. But here's where things get important. Let's talk about, instead of looking at it from an individual performance tracking perspective, we look at it from a capacity perspective, specifically like capacity planning. So we can have a lot of fun with that, and we can build that to tell the story that we want to tell. And I'm going to give some math that I've used in the past that I think has worked. So from the jump, this is something that I suggest to people if you're going to build something like a capacity model, because that brings you people, that brings you all kinds of cool shit. The need for people, or the ability to say I can take on more work. First off, and this is something I learned in consulting, 30% is overhead. People are going to take a shit. They're going to talk to their coworkers. They're going to browse the internet. About 30% of their time, overhead. I build my models with 30% overhead, every one of them. Then, from that new number, that 70% now becomes 100. I go, okay, so what does my SOC do? So my SOC handles alerts. Cool. Do I want my SOC doing other stuff? Well, yeah, I do. I want my SOC doing hunting exercises, which are harder to track. I want my SOC doing monthly rotations into different kind of stuff, like tuning and documentation writing and research into new detections and stuff. So I want all those things to happen. So those become useful. So now I go, well, how much time do I want my people to spend doing that in a perfect world? Well, I'm sorry. Realistically, about a quarter of their time. That's kind of how I'm budgeting. And your mileage may vary. Your situation may be different. Because again, like I don't do tiers or anything. So from that new 100%, I knock 25% off of that. And I say, 25% of their time is dedicated to this stuff. And we track this stuff in different ways, but it's not quantified to a direct number. Then we go, okay, this is the total number of analyst hours that I have left in a month. I've taken all this math, I've taken off my overhead, I've taken off my hunting and my rotations. I've got this many hours per month. Then I go, okay, so alerting, primary SOC goal, or primary SOC task for the most part. This is how many alerts came in. This is what that looks like. I can then take that data, I can extrapolate it and say, okay, based on the total number of alerts that came in and the total number of analyst hours that I have, this is exactly how much time each analyst had to do each alert. That can range. I've been at shops where the analyst had 3 minutes, which is fucking crazy. But still, I've been at shops where analysts had 3 minutes. Then you can further extrapolate that into a raw percentage by determining what you consider your average or acceptable triage time. So I work on kind of a gold standard of 15 minutes for basic triage, fully understanding that some things are going to take way longer, some things are going to take way shorter. So I take 15 minutes for base triage. Anything that's like a duplicate or a tune or something, when an analyst statuses it, gets a lower time score, because a duplicate or a tune, typically a lower time score. And it's not perfect math, but it works for the most part. And it gives you an idea of what your environment looks like. So you can then take all those numbers, kind of smash them together and say like, okay, this is the total amount of time that my analysts have per alert. This is the total number of analyst hours that I have in a month. This is the total number of alerts that came in. This is the percent capacity that I have that exists. I'm at 70%, or I'm at 80%, or I'm at 90%. In some models, if you don't remove the 30% overhead, you're saying, hey, I'm stuck at 70%. I remove that up front, so when I get close to 100%, I know that that's when we're screwed. Or we go over 100%, that's where we're going to be cutting into our threat hunting and the other stuff that we want to do. Like, we're going to be cutting into all that stuff. That's capacity planning in a nutshell. It's taking every indicator that you can, pulling it in, assigning it a time or hours value, and then using that from a justification perspective to move forward, or say, I need more bodies, or I can do more work, or, hey, I just want you to know that this thing over here is going to suffer because of this situation here, and here's data. Mm-hmm. Right? That's my spiel on capacity.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I think how much you set aside for your crew for the fun stuff, the threat hunting, the tool tuning, like updating documents, is more than I've seen most SOCs actually get a chance to.
Probably true. Yeah. But if our mission is find badness, protect users, then I want to make sure that we succeed at our mission. Our mission isn't just to close fucking alerts.
Yeah, and that stuff, I agree. That stuff is incredibly important. I mean, you've seen it. If you get one or two analysts that spend, I don't know, let's say 20 hours a month at tool tuning, and that brings down those alerts significantly, and now that time is spent more efficiently on finding the real badness instead of just getting fatigued under tons of your SIM or log correlation tool alerts.
So let's talk about how we can use data to help with that problem. Let's talk about how we can use data to signify and point out the specific things that you might want to go after from a tuning perspective. I've built something in the past called the fidelity matrix. Basically, I take total number of alerts that come in. I break that down into each individual rule, right? Mm-hmm. And I can also break it down into like source IP, dest IP, things like that. Mm-hmm. I want to know my top talkers. From there, not only do I take the total number of times that they came in, I also take the total number of times that they were equated to what would have turned into a ticket. So like duplicate things, the way that we track personally, and it's very important as you build this to like build your statuses to something that you can track. In our SIM tool, so to speak, we don't use duplicate if a ticket was created. Like we continue to use like that ticket one. That way I can say like, yeah, this thing fired a bunch and it was a duplicate, and I can make that correlation, but I can also say, but like 70% of the time this thing fired, it was bad, but it fired like 2,000 times. Like, can we trim that noise down? Or this thing only fired 5 times, 4 times it was bad. Hey, this is really fucking good. Mm-hmm. So you build this matrix, and that becomes really useful for an analyst, because I can look at that and I can go, well, we're going to go from here, and we're going to start here, and we're going to look at this rule, and we're going to see what we can fix, and we're going to extrapolate more data. That's an analyst level metric, I would call it, not like an executive level metric, right? And knowing your audience is so fucking important.
It is.
Because you have analyst level metrics, how you might want to approach tuning, things of that nature, like how you hunt. So like if you do hunts, like you should report your hunt so that somebody else doesn't do the same hunt when they're on a hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So like tracking some of that stuff, like hunting through low fidelity indicators. Yeah, you don't have to click every one and give it a disposition, but you actually do need to document it in some way. That being said, then you're going to have manager level metrics. So like me level metrics, which are going to be a little bit different. They're going to be more individual performance metrics. Is this person performing? How many tickets did Jimmy open? However, then I'm going to go look at Jimmy's tickets and I'm going to say like, are Jimmy's tickets any fucking good? Did Jimmy just pick the easy stuff?
Yep.
A lot of things go into that. I'm not really going to talk a lot about that though, because for the most part, I like to trust people and I think that's the least important. Now let's talk about metricing your threat landscape a little bit, because we got capacity, right? Your ability to handle work. Now let's talk about your threat landscape. You can do this a bunch of ways. You can use MITRE, you can use attacker kill chain, you can use any of that stuff. But if you tag alerts that come in and then you status them so that like the bad ones are the bad ones, right? You can then pull like a comprehensive yearly report with all your data, and you can go to your executive and you can be like, PowerShell was our #1 attack vector this year of things that we detected. These are all the things that we're detecting and looking for. These are the breakdown of like how many rules per MITRE category or MITRE technique or whatever. PowerShell is #1 for us. This is the number of times it was successful. This is the number of phishing emails that we got that were successful. Then you can further extrapolate that and say like PowerShell was the most successful and it usually came from here or included this or included that or whatever. So like the key here as you're doing this is like, it's okay to adjust your program to get the numbers that you need to tell the story. However, do not use numbers for evil. Do not just say, well, like there's some gut instinct in this and data to back it up. But don't just be like, this is why I'm so great, or this is why we're so behind, if that won't hold up. Your job is not to paint a picture that makes you look good or bad. Your job is to paint as honest of a picture as you can and then let somebody make a decision with that data.
Yeah.
If I leave a meeting with my CISO, I want him to be like, good work, I'm scared now. Like, that means I did my job.
Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, that CISO is the one who carries the responsibility for the organization, and it's that one that will be making the decision, right? The SOC just has the immediate like detection and triage, and sometimes they're wrapped into the actual incident response itself, but typically they're not decision makers, right? They don't get to decide who does what, when, where, because they, from a business standpoint, they typically don't have the big picture for the entire business.
Correct. So being able to present a realistic outlook of what it is that you're doing becomes so important. It's not just about looking good so you can get a promotion. It's about being honest and not twisting the numbers to look a certain way.
Because ultimately our goal is not necessarily, our goal is to increase the security posture of the organization.
Mm-hmm. And this is not much different than threat hunting. In threat hunting, we basically rack and stack based on different data points, and then we remove things, and then we continue down, right? Like that's the whole concept of threat hunting. This is a metrics program is not dissimilar. Find out what data points are important to you. Figure out how to implement those data points. Implement those data points. They're going to be different for everybody. I track to MITRE. I track to kill chain. I track to all different kinds of places depending on where I am and what the need is for that business. And what, I think is valuable for that specific business. When I was doing managed service work, we tracked capacity very heavily because it mattered a lot. Mm-hmm. But we also tracked like individual clients. So like what clients, like what are they paying us versus how much of a lift are they? Like that becomes a really important data point because you can go, client A is paying us basically fucking nothing and taking 60% of our time. Like that's where we are right now. Like we need to talk about that come contract time. So like everybody's going to have different baselines for what they need metrically in their environment.
Yeah. And
figure out what data points you care about, figure out how to get them, and then figure out how to mash them all together.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, on the service provider side, then those data points end up showing the value add stuff that wasn't necessarily explicitly stated in the contract, that continues to show the value or the lack of value that a specific service provider would do. So when that contract comes up, they can be like, hey, here's all this extra stuff that you got just as a byproduct by how our service provider was. Now let's talk about the next contract term.
Yep. And you can hate on this shit all you want.
Yep.
You're welcome to. But I'll tell you that you'll get a lot more done with it than you will without it. You will get the things that you need much... Well, I'm not going to promise you that. It will be much more likely that you get the things that you need if you can provide data. Plus, if you want to make yourself look fucking awesome, be able to provide a breakdown that's like, PowerShell was our #1 vector that worked. Especially if you're trying to go like, well, I really want to bring in CrowdStrike and I want to set it to auto blocking so it blocks most PowerShell. Or I want to fucking, application use like AppLocker so that PowerShell doesn't run. Shit like that. Being able to prove that was your #1 vector might get you the tool that you need. Like, really fucking cool and really important, other than, I feel like PowerShell's a problem. We need to buy this. Oh, it's like $9 million. Yeah. Yeah, but if you want to be secure, you need to spend this $9 million.
Oh, just trust me. Yeah. The just trust me doesn't work. All this metric stuff is the communication. It's speaking the language, and the communication is the key for everything, right? Like, being able to communicate information is what makes, not just in SOC, but in all of work in life, is what helps to have everyone get the things that they want and to disarm any misunderstandings or I just lost the word.
I know where you were going with that, though, and that's what matters.
So
I did promise regular vocal inflection.
Yes.
And changes. I'm not going to go high pitch though. I feel like that would hurt.
Yeah, my voice would break if I tried that. It would like crackle and break. So
mine too.
That was good. I mean, that was a good information, and it looks like we can move on to our detections conversation.
We can, for 2 reasons, because of Empire and because, well, fuck, there's a reason that I referenced PowerShell, because our detection concept tonight is, hey, ding, 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 you
PowerShell. Yeah.
Price is right.
So it wasn't directly related to the topic, but it is related to the news and things that are happening. And I thought PowerShell was a good one to end it with, because even though like we may personally work on a different system or have a Mac OS X heavy shop, the majority of businesses are Windows heavy.
Yes, they are.
So PowerShell becomes one of those highly important things. And I know for people that have paid any attention to news over this last year, it's becoming the go-to tool for attackers and pen testers to test the network defenses.
Second to email. Well, I shouldn't even say second to email. It's like a post-exploitation technique. Yeah. It's #1, like, by a long shot. Red Canary did a report that was like covering this stuff, and like they were #1 by a fucking lot.
It's the phishing to get to that initial exploitation, and then after that, it's PowerShell.
And then a Word document and a fucking macro, and we've already talked about how to detect that shit.
Yep.
But here's the first question. Can you even see PowerShell?
That is a really good question, because most places can't.
So let's talk about how easy it is to see it.
They do.
Windows, like, fully understood, like, PowerShell's being used for evil all the time. And they made it pretty possible for us to see it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to list off some numbers here, and then we'll talk about their significance. 200, 400, 500, 501, Alex. I'll take 4104 for 300. 300 is not actually a number. Like,
daily double.
Ignore the 300 number. That was confusing. 4104, however, is probably the most important number. Those are Windows event IDs that cover PowerShell. Those are things that you can turn on and collect via Sysmon and all this other shit. Pull into your SIM. And I mean, like, Carbon Blacks and CrowdStrikes and all that stuff, they have it too, but most medium to small size businesses can't afford enhanced EDR tools. So let's just talk about Sysmon and 4104. 4104, by the way, is PowerShell logging. So it's actual command line, like what ran in PowerShell. Very interesting stuff, and very important if you want to build detections on PowerShell.
Now, that's the one that can actually have the actual command being parsed through the PowerShell exe, right?
4104 is the one that does have the command parsed.
That is the one that I am most interested in when I'm going to look at stuff.
Yep.
Now, a cool thing on that same note, I don't know if you've looked at it before, but there is a Deep Blue CLI tool that uses that, and then 4103 and 4688, and it's a threat hunting platform made by some of the guys at Sands that specifically only looks at PowerShell.
I have not looked at that before.
Yeah, it came from Eric Conrad, and of course the link will be in there. But I'm looking at it, and it looks pretty like the stuff that I would manually do in Splunk or Greylog or stuff like that, already set up to do in this tool.
It was also written in PowerShell, which makes it even more fun.
Yes.
Because I'm just going to use it to be bad.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like it's looking for like user creations and password guessing and password spraying and a bunch of stuff, which is cool as a threat hunting tool. However, a lot of this stuff, when you can, build a long-term detection for it. Don't just rely on hunting, because hunting is a snapshot in time only. As cool as it is, you're getting, that month or 3 months or whatever. You're not getting anything that happens tomorrow. Anyway.
And and you're right. And one of the ways that we can go about looking at that long-term is looking at the user's behavior, right? So how many people in an organization actually need to be able to use PowerShell, the executable, to do their daily job?
So that's the number one question for detection. Can you kind of mark the people who should be using PowerShell and the people who shouldn't, and then detect on any potentially unauthorized PowerShell? But maybe that's not realistic, right? Maybe a lot of people need to use PowerShell, and that's cool. But what does that PowerShell look like in your environment? Do they fully write the commands? Really interesting shit about PowerShell. You can do like -window style hidden, which is actually a pretty good thing to key on, same as like executable bypass. And user privilege bypass, and I can't fucking remember the attack for that. But either way, but you can also do like win hid, because PowerShell will take just part of the command and still run. So like, how does your organization run it? Can you look for weird flags? It's actually a way attackers evade detection all the time, because they'll do like win hid, window hid, win hidden. Like, it's very hard to keyword match on a specific thing that shouldn't be run, because there's so many different ways to type it in.
So many variations. And you can do things with like regex expressions and stuff. And this is where we're getting back to like the whole atomic indicator versus behavior. But atomic indicators still have their place like this, right? Like, it helps you get started, lets you start seeing things. And, in some of the other modules in PowerShell is like net web client, download string, get net user. Get net user is a big one, because most people don't lock down their Active Directory structure, and they can do one request and get every single Active Directory attribute for every single client in one request.
Yep. Now, one of the problems that you're going to run into when you look at any of this stuff is, for the most part, a good majority of those commands are going to be completely and totally encoded. Base 64, all different kinds of shit is going to be going on there. So detect it that way.
Yeah. And exactly. Because how many regular users actually need to base 64 encode their PowerShell commands?
You should not have a single user who's base 64 in their PowerShell stuff.
Even your admins, right? Like, I think I've encountered like one fringe case where they had to do it to do a specific maintenance on a specific web server. But that's something that you can then have your analyst conduct, find the web dev or the web server owner, and then they tell you that. And then that one communication becomes as a documented known.
Yeah, there's so much cool stuff that you can do with PowerShell, and so many resources for it, because it's such a commonly used attack structure. Long PowerShell commands is another one that we took a note of, and that'll find a lot of the base 64 stuff too.
Yeah.
Like, it's really valuable, but you have to baseline your environment for it.
Yep.
And as a former threat hunter, I can tell you that one of the hunts that I used to do was PowerShell, and I used to look at every PowerShell command ran. And then I would be like, oh, that's a scheduled script, let's remove that. And I'd basically parse myself down to shit that was more and more interesting. And then I'd go back to the client, and I'd be like, this is the kind of PowerShell that happens in your environment. This is the kind of PowerShell that you should be looking for in your environment that, doesn't happen on a regular basis.
Yeah, that is a good way. And when you were talking, reminded me of a couple of the things when you were talking about the obfuscation. Different files, right? So like back to double extensions, doc, like a Word document, but then they put .js to make it actual a JavaScript file. And what'll happen is it'll run this PowerShell command through JavaScript, or these wonderful HTA files, which the last time I looked are generally not used ever anymore. But HTA files allow PowerShell to be ran without invoking PowerShell.exe.
I've never seen a legitimate HTA file.
Correct. So that becomes a very high fidelity thing to look at. Because the one time that I did it, I looked over like the past 9 months, and there was only one result.
Yep. You can also look at, PowerShell making connections, like external connections.
Yeah.
You'll probably have to remove some stuff if like you're using PowerShell for some of your updates or whatever. But you can whitelist out some of those additional connections and look. I love parent-child process mapping.
Yep.
Not everybody has that ability, but even time window matching for PowerShell plus net connection could be interesting depending on your environment.
And then that becomes the behavior, right? The higher fidelity kind of behavior that you would check into. Checking for the PowerShell to the outgoing or multiple outgoing connections, either internal to external or internal to internal, but also doing like PowerShell registry changes outside of your patching window.
Oh, yeah. I can't decide if we're selling ourselves short, if we're giving too much or not giving enough. Because like we promised one detection and we're like, here's 20.
Yep. I'm sorry, it's probably my fault. Like, this stuff is enjoyable, and I want analysts to be able to have some things that they can jump into tomorrow.
Hey, man, as long as we can continue to come up with them, which I think we'll probably be able to do, then we're good to go.
Yep. That was a lot.
I was going to say, that about covers that one, right?
Yes.
Cool. So, next week, reminder, Andrew Thompson and the controversy that is open source attack tooling. Does it help us? Does it hurt us? Is it somewhere in between? And what the hell are we going to do about it? Sneak peek. I have no fucking clue.
Just looking forward to it. It's awesome. It's going to be a great conversation. Thanks, everyone, for listening to this episode of Detections. And remember to go forth and find badness.